I sat quietly in the corner of the table, the red wine in my hand reflecting the shimmering chandelier above. Laughter echoed throughout the room, the clinking of glasses blending with sharp, mocking remarks. Another month of unemployment, huh, honey? I think you should try applying as a coffee shop assistant. Who knows, you might get lucky." Max laughed loudly, his eyes gleaming with amusement as I lowered my head, feigning embarrassment. The four men around the table burst into laughter, joining in on the spectacle. They had no idea that in just a few hours, their entire world would crumble beneath them. Max and his group of friends, smug in their expensive suits, always carried themselves as if they were the most powerful men in the room. They were senior executives at Sterling Corporation, a leading tech company dominating the market, a company they believed they had built, developed, and led to success. What they didn't know was that the true owner and mastermind behind it all was me. My name is Evelyn Carter, CEO and founder of Sterling Corporation, and I am Max's wife, the same woman he just mocked in front of his colleagues for entertainment. For the past 7 years, I have maintained this facade. When I first met Max, I decided to conduct an experiment. Instead of revealing that I was a successful businesswoman, I told him I was a struggling freelance financial consultant, still trying to find my place in the industry. I rented a modest apartment, drove an average car, and carried myself with quiet humility. At first, Max seemed like a warm, supportive man, encouraging me in the early years of our marriage. But that support slowly faded the moment he realized I didn't have a career he deemed worthy of pride, at least not by his standards. In Max's eyes, I was a lucky wife, fortunate to be financially supported by him. He thrived on playing the role of the hero, the sole provider, the one who held all the power in our marriage. Over time, he stopped hiding his contempt, and tonight, just like every other night, he used me as the punchline of his jokes. I quietly raised my wine glass to my lips, masking a faint smile. They didn't know. They didn't know that everything they had, their titles, their salaries, the multi-million-dollar contracts they boasted about, was in my hands. They didn't know that I was the one signing their promotions, approving their budgets, or even hiring the headhunting firms that had recruited each of them. And they certainly didn't know that by tomorrow it would all be over. I had been planning this for a long time. After years of careful observation, gathering evidence, and meticulously setting each piece into place, I was ready to pull back the curtain. Sterling Corporation was not just the company I built. It was the perfect symbol of the revenge I was about to unleash. Max lifted his glass, toasting with his colleagues. "Let's drink to women who persevere, even when they fail over and over again," he said, casting a mocking glance in my direction. I set my glass down on the table and smiled softly. "Enjoy your night, gentlemen, because tomorrow everything will change forever." I started gathering information nearly 2 years ago when the first signs of corruption and abuse of power by Max and his circle at Sterling Corporation began to surface. I had seen how they exploited their positions for personal gain, bent the rules, and manipulated contracts. But suspicion alone wasn't enough. I needed proof. I hired a team of private investigators, the best in the business, to track their every move, every secret meeting, every lavish dinner paid for with company funds, every email exchanging favors with external partners. It was all meticulously documented. I even installed my own surveillance system, an invisible data collection network embedded within Sterling Corporation's internal infrastructure. What I uncovered was far worse than I had imagined. Max and his group weren't just corrupt. They were actively colluding with rival companies to line their own pockets, selling Sterling Corporation's confidential information and manipulating internal markets for their own benefit. I had everything: leaked emails, text messages discussing bid prices with competitors, even records of suspicious transactions flowing into their personal accounts. But perhaps the most repulsive discovery was the way they treated their subordinates: harassment, humiliation, exploitation of those who couldn't fight back. I knew that gathering evidence alone wasn't enough. I needed a more powerful strike. I needed to witness firsthand the toxic culture they had cultivated. So, I decided to experience it myself. I applied for a job at my own company, of course not under the name Evelyn Carter, CEO of Sterling Corporation, but as someone entirely different, Emily Brooks, an ordinary candidate looking for an opportunity. I created a completely new, sound identity, carefully crafted to ensure that I appeared as nothing more than a struggling woman in the eyes of their recruitment team. They suspected nothing. A few days later, I received an email, an invitation for an interview. The interview took place in a small conference room on the 7th floor of Sterling Corporation's headquarters. I dressed in a modest, unassuming suit, deliberately choosing a pair of slightly worn shoes to match the image of a woman struggling to find employment. 3 men sat in the interview room, all of them Max's trusted subordinates. I recognized every single face. They had all been at the private gatherings where I was mocked behind my back. "You've been unemployed for quite some time, haven't you?" one of them sneered, flipping through my resume. "Yes, I've been trying to find a suitable position," I replied, deliberately keeping my voice timid and humble. "Unfortunately," another man said, looking me up and down with a condescending smirk, "the job market is very competitive these days. We receive hundreds of applications from candidates far more qualified than you." I could tell they had already made their decision the moment I walked into the room. They weren't interested in my skills or experience. All they saw was a mediocre woman with no connections, no value to exploit. The interview lasted exactly 15 minutes, but they spent more than half of it mocking me rather than assessing my abilities. One of them even pulled out his phone and started texting while I was answering a question. I didn't need to see the screen to know who he was messaging, Max. And just as I expected, moments later, all 3 of their phones buzzed at the same time. "You've got to be kidding me," one of them chuckled, glancing down at his screen. I didn't have to look. I already knew what Max had sent. He knew I was here, and he was laughing at me. I was used to this, but I kept my act intact, lowering my head and mumbling a quiet "thank you" as they gave me their fake, insincere assurance that they would be in touch. I walked out of the interview room without a word. I didn't need to call back. I didn't need their approval. I had already gotten exactly what I wanted. I had seen how they operated, how they dismissed those they deemed unworthy, those they considered disposable, how they had cultivated a toxic culture where only men like Max could thrive. They thought they had control over everything. They thought they could continue to manipulate and destroy anyone they pleased. But tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, I would no longer be Emily Brooks, the unemployed woman. Tomorrow, I would step into that boardroom, not as a desperate job applicant, but as the head of Sterling Corporation, and I would do something they never saw coming. I would end it all. The next morning, I arrived at the company earlier than usual, but this time, I didn't slip through the back entrance like some desperate candidate. I walked through the main lobby of Sterling Corporation, where employees hurried past, nodding politely without knowing who I was. That was fine. After today, they would never forget me. Inside the large boardroom, everything was set. The shareholders had been summoned, the executive team was present, and on the massive screen behind me, all the evidence was ready to be exposed. I didn't need to say much. The proof I had gathered over the past 2 years would speak for itself. As the door swung open, Max and his 4 closest colleagues strode in, still wearing their smug smiles. They believed this meeting was just another financial report, a routine gathering where they would be praised for their so-called achievements. They had no idea that today would be the last time they ever set foot in Sterling Corporation as men of power. I sat at the head of the table, calm and composed, watching as Max settled into his seat, the vice president's chair that he had been so proud of. Then he saw me. His smile faltered, his voice wavered with confusion. His eyes darted around the room, searching for answers, trying to understand why his unemployed wife was sitting in on a high-level executive meeting. But no one spoke to clarify things for him. I placed my hand on the thick folder in front of me, my voice devoid of the humility he had grown accustomed to over the past 8 years. "Sit down, Max. You and your friends will want to hear what I have to say." I could see the hesitation in his eyes. He hadn't fully realized he was standing at the edge of a cliff, but he followed my command anyway, along with the other 4 men, all of them shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "Before we begin," I continued, locking eyes with Max, emphasizing each word, "I'd like to formally reintroduce myself. I am Evelyn Carter, founder and CEO of Sterling Corporation." A suffocating silence filled the room. Expressions of shock turned to sheer panic. Max looked as if he had forgotten how to breathe, while his colleagues turned pale, beads of sweat forming on their brows. But I didn't stop. I clicked a button, and behind me, the massive screen came to life. Displayed for everyone to see were documents, emails, text messages, video recordings, and audio files, every shred of evidence detailing their corruption, leaked confidential information, workplace harassment, and contract manipulation. "For the past 2 years, I have quietly gathered evidence of your misconduct," I stated, my tone cool and unwavering. "I have records of every illegal transaction, every time company funds were abused for personal luxuries, every email exchange with our competitors, and even conversations you all thought were private." I glanced at Max, watching as he struggled to swallow the lump in his throat. "And don't worry, Max, I haven't forgotten all those times you humiliated me in front of everyone." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "You all thought you were untouchable, but only because I allowed you to think that way." I stood, turning my gaze toward the shareholders, my presence commanding the room. "I have more than enough evidence to file reports with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the legal department, and federal investigators. But before I do that, there is one small matter I need to take care of first." I picked up the stack of termination documents, signed each one with unwavering precision, and slid them across the table toward Max and his cronies. "Effective immediately, you are all fired from Sterling Corporation." Max shot up from his chair, his face flushed with a mix of anger and fear. "You can't do this," he roared. "I'm the vice president. I built this company." "You never built anything," I cut him off, my voice cold and steady. "I am the one who created this company. I am the one who hired you. I am the one who let you into my life, and now I am the one who is throwing you out of all of it." The boardroom doors swung open. Security stepped inside, ready to escort the newly terminated executives out of the building. Max staggered back, his eyes wide with sheer disbelief. He turned to his colleagues, desperately seeking support, but no one stood by him. Every single one of them lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. He was alone. I calmly gathered the remaining documents in front of me. "Your belongings have been packed. Your access to the company systems has been revoked. Leave quietly before I make this even worse for you." Max trembled as he looked at me, but he had nothing left to say. One by one, they were led out of the room. I didn't bother watching them go. From the upper floors, I could see a crowd of employees gathering in the lobby, peering through the massive glass panels. News had spread fast. Sterling Corporation had finally cut away the cancer that had been rotting it from the inside. It took only a few hours for the story to break. Financial news outlets erupted with headlines about the massive purge at Sterling Corporation. Social media exploded as people dug into Max and his group's past, uncovering countless stories of how they had abused their power within the company. The phone calls from rival firms started coming in, but not to recruit Max and his associates. No one wanted to be associated with the men Sterling Corporation had just publicly exposed. One by one, Max's circle crumbled. A week later, I received news that 3 of their wives had filed for divorce. They had no way to hold on to the luxurious lives they once flaunted. Max, the man who once sat in a corner office with a panoramic view of the city, was now working as a sales associate in a small electronics store in the suburbs. He could no longer hold his head high. And me? I didn't need to lift my head to know that I had won. I didn't need to seek vengeance and cruelty. I had simply taken back what was mine. 3 months after Max and his group were removed, Sterling Corporation was no longer the company they once controlled. I sat in my own corner office, gazing out at the expanse of New York City under the morning sun. The company I had built from the ground up had finally returned to its original purpose, a place of innovation, creativity, and progress, untainted by opportunists. The reformation had begun on day one after the Purge. I called for an all-company meeting, stepping before thousands of employees for the first time, not as Max's unemployed wife, but as Evelyn Carter, CEO and founder of Sterling Corporation. "We're starting over," I told them, "and this time, no one will be left behind." The changes came swiftly. I fired every person who had enabled Max and his group, especially those in HR, the ones who had turned a blind eye to harassment and discrimination for years. The vacant positions were filled with highly skilled professionals, many of whom had been pushed out under the old regime. Among them was Lisa Hall, an exceptional software engineer whom Max had personally removed from a major project simply because she refused to join his pointless drinking parties. When I called Lisa and offered her the opportunity to return, she hesitated. "Do you really want me back?" she asked over the phone, her voice laced with disbelief. "I don't just want you back," I told her. "I want you to lead our new AI research team." A week later, Lisa walked back into Sterling Corporation for the first time, stepping through the front doors without fear. The company culture had transformed completely. I implemented stricter transparency policies, an anonymous reporting system where employees could safely report internal issues without fear of retaliation. Every senior manager was required to undergo ethics and leadership training. But I didn't stop there. We launched an employee mentorship program where experienced professionals would guide and support new employees, instead of tearing them down the way Max and his colleagues had done. Anyone found guilty of harassment or abuse of power was dealt with immediately. The atmosphere in the company changed day by day. Smiles returned to employees' faces. Meetings were no longer filled with condescending glances or passive-aggressive remarks. For the first time in years, I could walk through the halls of Sterling Corporation without feeling the crushing weight of a toxic environment. As the internal culture stabilized, the company's financial results quickly reflected the transformation. In just 2 months, Sterling Corporation signed 3 major contracts, one of which was with a leading telecommunications conglomerate. Previously, they had refused to work with Sterling, partly due to the bad reputation the company had earned under Max's leadership. But once news of my corporate overhaul spread, they approached us instead. Stock prices soared by 35% within 3 months. Investors who had once hesitated due to Max's leadership now had full confidence in me. The media began praising Sterling Corporation's dramatic resurgence. A Business Insider article even dubbed me the woman who revived a tech empire. But what satisfied me most wasn't the numbers or the headlines. It was the moment I walked past the employee break room one afternoon and saw Lisa and her team eagerly discussing a new project, no longer fearful, no longer hesitant. They were working with passion, something this company should have had all along. And in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. While Sterling Corporation rose stronger than ever, Max and his cronies sank to the bottom. Max was no longer mentioned in financial circles. He was no longer featured in articles about powerful executives. He had become a forgotten man, a cautionary tale for those who thought they could manipulate power without consequences. I heard that he was now working as a sales associate at a small electronics store, where no one cared that he had once been a vice president at a billion-dollar company. The others weren't doing any better. 3 members of Max's group were banned from working in the tech industry for the next 3 years due to violations of their non-compete agreements. One of them tried to sue Sterling Corporation but lost miserably when every shred of evidence stood against them. I no longer cared about them. They were irrelevant. The only thing that mattered now was the future of Sterling Corporation, a company no longer controlled by men like Max, but led by those with true talent and integrity. 6 months later, Sterling Corporation had completely transformed. I stood by my office window, looking down at the city stretching beneath the night sky. The Sterling headquarters was glowing, its floors bustling with hundreds of employees still working with renewed passion and drive. I took a deep breath, letting myself feel a peace I hadn't felt in years. Looking back, the past 6 months had been a long journey. Sterling hadn't just survived the upheaval, it had emerged stronger than ever. Stock prices had stabilized, last quarter's profits reached an all-time high, and most important, the workplace culture had changed. Gone were the days of tense meetings, the fear of being undermined or excluded. Now, employees were free to create, to grow, to thrive without having to bow to men like Max and his cronies. I could see it in their eyes when I walked through the halls, a change that was undeniable. But Sterling's resurgence wasn't the only thing that satisfied me. Max's downfall was just as valuable a lesson. I didn't need to track him. The news found its way to me. Max was now a forgotten name in financial circles. The big corporations refused to hire him. The people who once flattered him, who basked in his influence, now turned their backs. No one wanted to be associated with a man publicly exposed and disgraced by Sterling Corporation. He was now working as a sales associate at a small electronics store in the suburbs of Chicago. One of the binding conditions of his termination contract was that he was banned from working in high-level tech for 3 years. And now he stood behind a counter, wearing a store uniform, selling phones and tablets to customers. An old friend of mine happened to see him at the store. She told me that Max looked like a man who had lost everything, no more expensive suits, no more Rolex watch that he once flaunted with pride. He had lost weight, his face hollow, his eyes vacant as he scanned barcodes for customers. He had lost all his career, reputation, wealth, and the luxurious life he once took for granted. His wife left him right after the scandal. She couldn't stand going from being the wife of a vice president to living in a cramped apartment, watching her husband work as a sales clerk. She filed for divorce 2 months after he was fired, taking nearly everything that remained in his accounts. Max had once mocked me, convinced that I would never succeed. But now I stood at the top, while he struggled just to get through each day. I no longer dwell on the past. I used to think that seeing Max hit rock bottom would bring me satisfaction, but the truth is, I don't care anymore. Revenge was no longer my motivation. What I did wasn't just about bringing Max down. It was about restoring justice for those he had stepped on and rebuilding the company I had built with my own blood, sweat, and intellect. There are days when I sit in my office, reflecting on everything that has happened. I think about the first time I met Max, when I still believed he was a good man. I think about all the times I forced myself to smile through his cruel jokes. I think about the moment I walked into that boardroom, stood in front of him, and revealed the truth. But now it's all just a story from the past. I spent too much time living in Max's shadow, letting him believe he had control over my life. But not anymore. Now I only care about the future of Sterling Corporation. The company is expanding rapidly. We just signed a partnership deal with a leading software corporation, extending our operations into Europe. Lisa's AI research team has exceeded all expectations, and she is now one of the most influential leaders in the company. I also launched a mentorship program specifically for young women pursuing careers in tech. I know that far too many talented individuals have been pushed aside simply because they lack the power to fight back. I won't let that happen anymore. Sterling Corporation will not just be a successful company, it will be a symbol of fairness, of innovation, and of people who refuse to be silenced. And I will make sure that it stays that way. I stepped out of my office, watching as my employees laughed and chatted in the hallway. No more fear, no more pressure, no more feeling suffocated under the weight of corruption and power abuse. That was the moment I realized true revenge isn't about destroying others, it's about building something better. I walked into the boardroom, where the executive team was waiting to discuss our next expansion plan. As I pulled out my chair and sat down, I was no longer the woman who had been mocked for being unemployed. I was Evelyn Carter, CEO of Sterling Corporation, and this was only the beginning. Evelyn Carter's story is not just a perfect act of revenge, but also a lesson in perseverance, justice, and true leadership. It highlights a clear reality in the corporate world. Power does not belong to manipulators, but to those with talent and integrity. Success is not measured solely by wealth or status, but by the positive impact one has on the environment around them. In real life, people like Max may thrive for a while, but the truth always prevails, and those who truly deserve it will ultimately take their rightful place. What do you think about Evelyn Carter's story? Did she do the right thing, or do you see it differently? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow the channel so you won't miss more compelling stories about life, family, and justice.